Good day, culinarians. Today we're going to go over Chapter 20. Chapter 20, Understanding Fish and Shellfish. Like I've said before, you'll be tested on this chapter, so make sure you read the chapter. Keep all your tests because your final written exam will consist of all the written tests you've taken this semester. So your written test from all the previous tests for your final, that'll be your study guide. So your study guide for the final exam, final written exam, will be all the tests that you've accumulated so far this semester. So we're going to start out with Chapter 20 here. Chapter 20, Understanding Fish and Shellfish. One of the things in this chapter that we'll look over is understanding, the structure of seafood. One of the things with meat, when we went over the meat chapter, there's a lot of different cuts of meats. Okay, you break down the carcass of meat, and you got hundreds of different types of cuts. Okay, with seafood, especially fin fish, with fish, you only got a couple basic cuts. Okay, but there are hundreds of breeds of fish out there. So the cooking techniques, the cooking styles are going to be unique and different with every type of fish and with every cut of fish. So between the seafood and the beef, you got kind of total opposite. One, you have a lot of cuts and few different parts of the animal. And the other one, you have just a few cuts with a lot of different types of animal. So with seafood, there's hundreds of different types of fish, okay, but only a couple of cuts for those fish. In this chapter, we'll go over the difference between a fin fish and a shellfish. Fin fish has internal skeleton, and of course they have fins and fins on there. Shellfish have external skeletons. So fin fish, internal skeletons; shellfish, external skeletons. That's on page 595. Turning into page 596, we get into varieties and characteristics of the seafood. One of the main things that we want to talk about first, on top of page 596, is dromonous fish. Dromonous fish, they live in salt water, but they spawn in fresh water, such as salmon and shad. They'll live their lives in salt water and then come upstream to fresh water and to spawn. On the bottom page 596, they talk about saltwater and flatfish. Flatfish, examples there: flounder, halibut, Dover sole, turbot. Flatfish, basically what it is, what the name implies, the fish is flat. Okay, the fish is flat. Normally, these flatfish swim on the bottom of the ocean. When you get into class, when we break down the flounder, you're going to see on that flatfish, it's going to be a certain color on top, and generally they're white underneath. That color up top with flounder that we're going to be breaking down, that color on top is grayish color, kind of like the color of the sand on the bottom of the ocean, and the belly of it is white. Okay, the reason why two different colors, one color up top, that gray, is camouflage for predators. Underneath, the belly is white. Doesn't really need color on there because it doesn't have to camouflage. So the belly is white on there. Top of page 597, get into saltwater roundfish. Now, as we go through these chapters, 596, 597, there's all kinds of fish on there. I would make sure you look over those fish, get kind of used to some of what these fish look like. The flounder and the turbo. We get into the roundfish. You got the black sea bass. You got the bluefish. You got the cod. Difference between a flatfish and a roundfish. Flatfish, when you go to fillet it, normally you can get 4 fillets off of the flatfish. You're going to have the top part. When you break it down, you're going to break down that fillet off the top part. Then you cut that in half. Then you get 2 fillets there. On the belly part, you cut that out and you get 2 fillets there. So on a flatfish, traditionally you can get 4 fillets off of there. A round fish, you traditionally get 2 fillets off of there, 1 on either side. So the round fish, just what it says, it's round. So you got 1 fillet on one side, 1 fillet on the other side. Flatfish, on the top, you get 2 fillets. On the bottom, you get 2 fillets. Page 598, 599 talks about all different types of fish. You got your haddock there, you got your herring, you got your mackerel, which is a very oily fish. It's a fat fish. Get into 599, you got your mahi-mahi. Anybody gets traditional fish tacos. I discovered this when I lived out in California. Fish tacos, a lot of times it's made with mahi-mahi. It's a nice fish, nice flavorful fish. Got your monkfish, you got your porgy. Page 600, you got some more different types of fish on there. You got your red snapper, you got your salmon. Salmon, like we said, was a dromatous fish. Live its life in salt water, swim upstream in fresh water to spawn and reproduce. You got your shad. Shad usually runs off the East Coast, up North Carolina, up through Maryland and Jersey. You got your skate, also known as a ray. It's a lean type of product right there with the skate fish. You got your tigerfish, page 601. 602, get into some more freshwater fish. Freshwater fish, you got catfish, eel, perch, very common around lakes and streams. Page 603, you got your trout, you got your whitefish. One interesting things about a pike is lean fish, northern pike, walleye, very bony fish. You gotta be real careful when you go to clean those, make sure you get all the little fine pin bones out of there. Page 603, they talk about different cuts of the fish, the different fabrication, the market forms of the cuts of the fish. You got some restaurants still buy whole fish for various reasons. A lot of places that buy the whole fish, they'll clean it, and then they'll save the head and the bones to make stock out of it. So generally, if the restaurant's getting a whole fish in, they're cleaning it up, breaking it down, they're going to use what's left over to make a stock. Normally, when you purchase fish, it's already cleaned and ready to go. When we get in our flounder here for you guys to break down, it's going to be gutted and scaled, okay? Gutted and scaled, so it's going to be dressed. Reason why it's gutted and scaled, you usually want to take the guts out once you harvest the fish out of the ocean. You want to clean it, gut it. Descaling, you always want to make sure you get your fish descaled. If you have to descale your fish in your restaurant, you're going to have scales all over the place. It's very messy, so you always want to purchase your fish. If you get any kind of fish in, make sure it's descaled. Okay, that way you don't have all those scales all over your restaurant, all over your prep area. Page 603, you have different cuts there. You got your whole fish, your drawn fish, your dressed fish. Dressed fish, basically taking the fins off, the head off, the tail off. You got your fish cut into steaks. Usually if you're going to get your fish cut into steaks, you're going to use a round fish. Example, salmon. Get a whole salmon in, you want salmon steaks. You're going to cut them just like get a beef tenderloin or a New York strip and just cut them into steaks, so they're nice round steaks. Traditionally, if you get the salmon cut into steaks, you're still going to have that bone in there in the center spinal bone in there. You're going to get your fillets, your sticks, and your butterfly fillets of different cuts. On page 604, 605, they show you how to break down a round fish and a whole fish. On page 605, they show you how to break down the fillet off the flounder. They have video posted on the Moodle site on how to break down the flounder correctly. And then when we come into class, I'll show you how to break down the flounder. Then you guys are going to break down one yourself. Page 606, get into handling and cooking of fish. Remember, fish is very delicate. You know, where does fish come from? It comes from the ocean, it comes from water. Okay, there's a lot of moisture in that product. So one of the bad habits that happens when chefs cook seafood is they tend to overcook it. Okay, seafood cooks very quickly. You'll see that when you get into class and we go to cook the flounder. You're just going to do a light sear on one side, turn it over, finish searing it, take it out of the pan. We'll make a sauce and put it on top. It only takes a few minutes to cook fresh fish, especially nice thin fish like a flounder that you guys are going to do. Bottom page 605, talk about when you're cooking the fish, when you'll see it change color. It becomes very flaky, then you know it's ready. Okay, like I said, be careful, don't overcook seafood. Okay, when the fish turns translucent, then it goes from translucent to opaque. That way you know it's done. You know the piece of fish is done. Top page 607, get into lean fish and fat fish. Lean fish, flounder, sole. Fat fish, salmon, tuna, trout. Cooking lean fish, usually if you're going to cook lean fish, you want to use some sort of moist heat. Sauteing is preferred choice for cooking lean fish. Cooking fat fish, when you're cooking fat fish, you want to try to get some of the oils out of there, so cook it on the grill is a really good way to cook that type of fish. Get a piece of mackerel, sear it on the grill, maybe finish off in the oven, but you want to get some of that oils out of the fish. If you go to saute a lot of the fat fish that are very oily, it's going to be cooking in that oil, and a lot of times it'll get too strong of a flavor for you, too strong of a taste for you. So that's why you want to cook fat fish over an open fire or something like that to extract some of that oil from the fat fish. Storing, receiving fish. If you're going to receive fresh fish, give it a smell, okay? Smell it. Does it smell like the ocean? You know, if you're receiving fresh saltwater fish, it should smell like the ocean. You know, a lot of you guys probably vacation down at Myrtle Beach or down on the coast. What's the first thing you notice when you drive to the coast? As you're driving closer to the ocean, you smell that. You smell that ocean air. That's what the fresh seafood should smell like. So you get fresh seafood in, it should smell like the ocean, like you're just going to the ocean. Also, when you receive it, you look at the fish. If it's a whole fish, look at the eyes. The eyes are nice and clear. It's nice and fresh. If they're cloudy, they're sunken, that means that fish is pretty old. Same if it's real slimy. You get in some fresh seafood, and you go to pick it up, and it's real slimy. Usually that's no good. Look at the gills. Look in the gills. When you look at the gills, they should be nice bright red. If they're really brown and gray and dingy looking, it means it's an old fish. You don't want that. You want nice, fresh fish. When you receive fresh fish, usually it's packed in some sort of ice. So when we get our flounder in, we get our flounder from Fisherman's Catch. When we get in, it'll come in a box. Usually they'll put the flounder in a bag, a plastic bag. Then they'll pack it with ice, so it stays nice and cold. Remember previous chapters we were talking about fresh seafood should be delivered, around 30, 32 degrees. That's what they're talking about. It should be packed with ice. When we go to store it, when we get in our fresh flounder here and we go to store it, we'll put it in a Lexan with the perforated Lexan inside of it. You got your Lexan, perforated Lexan inside of it. You'll put the flounder down in that Lexan with the belly side down. line it up in there, then we'll put a piece of plastic over it, okay? Then we'll put ice on top of it to keep it nice and cold. When you go to store your fresh fish, you never want to put ice directly on the fish to store it. If you put the ice directly on the fish to store it, you could have burn marks on the seafood from the cold ice, okay? So you always want to have some sort of barrier there. Some chefs will get a plastic bag, fill it with ice, and set it on top of the fresh fish, and that's fine. As long as you have some ice on there and some sort of barrier. If we're doing the Lexan, we put the fish in, we put the plastic wrap on top, we pack it with ice on top of that, we put it in a walk-in cooler. As the ice melts, it'll keep the fish nice and cold, and it'll drip through the Lexan, and it'll end up on the bottom of the lower Lexan. That way the fish isn't sitting in water, okay? So you want to put the fish down, perforate Lexan, put a piece of plastic over the top, and then put ice on top of that. That's how you store fresh fish. Page 608, they talk about the seafood seal. If you're getting in any kind of seafood, it should have some sort of seal on it. Same with grading. Seafood is graded, grade A, so it's fit for human consumption. So you want to make sure it has a seal of approval on there before you get any kind of seafood. Just ask your vendor, whoever you're purchasing from, make sure it has a seal on there. Page 609 at the top, talk about storage of fish. If you get in frozen fish or you get in fresh fish and you freeze it, fat fish usually stays for about 2 months in the freezer. Lean fish up to about 6 months in the freezer as it's frozen. Page 610, we get into shellfish and mollusks. Shellfish, distinguished from fish, hard outer shells, lack of bone structure or their internal skeleton. On the shellfish mollusks and cephalopods, you have the mollusks. Mollusks have different forms of mollusks. You have the bivalves, the univalves. You also have the cenopods, such as octopus and squids. You got crustaceans. Crustaceans are animals with the external shells, such as shrimp and lobster, crabs. Got your oysters. Bottom page 610 have different types of oysters. Oysters, generally speaking, you want to purchase them. You don't really want to purchase oysters over the summertime. Old adage was, during the summertime the water's a little bit warmer, bacteria levels are a little bit higher. So generally, you never bought oysters or shellfish during the summertime because of that reason. Nowadays, with the oyster farms that they have, they can regulate the temperature of the water. So it's a little bit more safer now to buy oysters during the summertime. Me personally, during the summer, I stop eating oysters. When it comes September, I go back to eating oysters. Page 611, talk about different market forms of shellfish. Usually you buy them by the bags or by the bushels, and they have different counts in those bushels. Larger counts, 160 or so. Just like we talked previous, the larger the number, the smaller the product. So if you're getting shrimp, for example, you're buying shrimp by the pound. If you get shrimp that are 50, 60 shrimp, those are really small shrimp. Generally, you use those small shrimp for making shrimp salad or something like that. You get 2120s, those are larger shrimp. So that means there's 20 to 21 of them per pound. Usually in the restaurant, if I'm cooking, I'll get the U12s or the U13s or the U14s. That means there's 12 or 13 shrimp per pound. So those shrimp are about an ounce a piece, maybe a little bit more. Those are larger shrimp. Those are really good shrimp for cooking with. So with the count determines how many per pound. So if you have shrimp, 2021 shrimp, that means there's 2021 per pound. Those are larger shrimp. Use those to cook with. Generally, you'll see those in the market form in a lot of restaurants use that size. Like I said, the larger the number, 60, 80 count, something like that, 100 count. Those are really tiny shrimp, and that's what you use to make a shrimp salad. 611, they get into opening oysters. Always make sure you wear that safety glove when you wear oysters, when you open oysters. When you get into garmager, Chef Ray will show you how to open up seafood. He'll have you shuck oysters and clams and cook those off. Storage, keep live oysters in cold area. When you get in shellfish like oysters and clams, they'll come with a tag. Always make sure you have this tag with your oysters. So if you receive an order of oysters, it should come with a tag. That tag tells when the oysters were harvested, where it was harvested, the bed it was harvested in, has all the information on those oysters. When you get those tags, you want to save them for 90 days. Generally what I do is when we get those tags in, we put them in a little Ziploc bag and stick them in the walk-in cooler, left-hand side, right-hand side of the walk-in cooler. As soon as you go in the walk-in cooler, you see a little Ziploc bag, it has the tag in there. Keep those tags for 90 days. So if you end up having a restaurant and you get in fresh oysters and someone got sick from eating those oysters, you pull out the tag, give that to the health department will track it down, they can find out where those oysters came from, okay? Once they find out where those oysters came from, they can investigate the bed. Maybe the bed was polluted or there's something wrong with that bed and people are getting sick from eating those oysters. So it can track it back to where it was harvested at, where those oysters are harvested at. So whenever you get the shellfish in, clams, oysters, save that tag, 90 days, just in case someone gets sick. The reason why I say put it in the walk-in cooler, you don't want to keep that stuff in the chef's office. Because if I would take those tags and put them in my office, after a few days, that shellfish will have the shellfish juice on it, the saltwater juice on it. It'll sit in the office, get room temperature. It'll start smelling really bad, okay? That's why we always put them in a Ziploc bag, stick them in the walk-in cooler. That way you don't have to worry about it smelling up the place, okay? Page 612, get into market forms of clams. You get live in the shell clams, you get shucked clams, canned or whole or chopped. Usually if you're working in a restaurant and you have a clam chowder, New England clam chowder on your menu, you're not going to get in a couple bushels of clams and shuck them and then cook them and then make soup out of it. You're going to get in a can of clams, okay? You can open that up and make your soup out of it. Now, if you're someplace up north, New England, and they have abundance of clams up there, they're going to shuck all those clams and make fresh soup out of it. But generally speaking, you're inland, you don't have access to a lot of fresh seafood, you're going to buy those canned clams. Buy those canned clams and make your soup out of it. Page 613, talk about mussels. Different market forms of mussels. They're sold just like clams and oysters, by the bushel, by the bag. With the mussels, a little black mussel, and you're going to have this little, it's called a beard on those mussels. Little piece of fibrous tissue hanging out of that mussel, okay? What you're going to do is before you cook and eat those mussels, you're going to rip that beard out. You're going to rip that out, and you're going to cook them off. You're going to saute them up, put them in a stew, whatever you're going to do. But you got to make sure you take that fibrous stuff off that mussel, which is called the beard. Page 614, get into scallops, cooking scallops. When you go to cook scallops, do two different types of scallops. You're going to have your sea scallops and your bay scallops. Bay scallops, really small, they're really tiny, almost the size of a eraser, a pencil. If you look at a pencil, you got the little eraser on the end. Bay scallops are usually real small like that. Sea scallops can get very large. Sea scallops, you purchase them just like shrimp. Whenever I'm cooking in the restaurant, I usually got the U12 scallops, which means there's 12 scallops per pound. So those are a little bit more than an ounce a piece. Okay, sear them lightly on both sides and serve them. It's another thing you don't want to overcook. Sear them lightly, get a nice color on each side, and then serve them right up. Before you start cooking your scallops, you got to clean the scallops. If you look, the scallops are nice and round. On the side of the scallop, there's a little muscle. That little piece of muscle is what's attached to the shell. So when you take your scallop out of the shell, that muscle is still attached. You got to tear that muscle off the side of the scallop and then sear it and cook it. If you leave that muscle on the side of the scallop, once you cook it and you go to eat it, it's going to be very tough, very rubbery. So you want to make sure you take that off. One little trick of the trade that you got to look for, if you buy in scallops, look at them. If they're round and have that muscle tissue on there, pull it off and cook it. If you get a bunch of scallops in at a really good price and you look at them and they're perfectly round and they look great, but they don't have that muscle on there, you got to be real hesitant. What a lot of vendors do, they'll take shark meat in. Shark meat's a lot cheaper. They'll get that shark meat, punch it out, stamp it out into little round discs to make them look just like scallops, and they'll sell them as scallops. Okay, so you got to be careful of that. So when you get in your scallops, look on the sides, especially the larger ones. If you see a little muscle tissue on there, take it off. You know you got some good scallops. Page 615, cephalopods, squids, octopus. Squid, usually referred to as calamari. So if you go to a restaurant and get some calamari, you're taking that squid. On the squid, you want to take that internal skeleton out of that squid. It's usually pretty clear. Pull that out, then you cut it up into usually rings. Tentacles, you just cut those up. Buttermilk, bread them, fry them. They're pretty good. Or you can just saute them off. Octopus means 8 feet. Octopus is very common in Italian restaurants. If you go to an Italian restaurant, you'll see octopus on the menu. Octopus texture, if you don't tenderize it, could be very tough. Octopus is very versatile. Serve it hot, serve it cold. It's very good, but you got to make sure you tenderize it real well before you start preparing it and eating it. Page 616, get into shellfish and crustaceans and other seafoods. Lobsters. Lobsters are segmented with joints on them. So if you look at the lobster, you're going to see different segments on there, different joints on there. The meat and claws can be eaten off the lobster. Same with the legs. Get the lobster in, cook it off. However you're going to cook it off, either steam it, boil it, or bake it in the oven, throw it on the grill. However you're going to do it. But the meat, you can take the claw meat, which is very sweet. You get the tail meat, which is very good. And then the legs, you have some sort of meat in the legs. So if you take the legs off, best way to get the meat out of the legs is take them off the lobster itself, lay them down, take a rolling pin or a round wooden dowel, and just roll it over the legs, and the meat will come right out of it. There's a little bit of meat in there. Different types of lobsters. You got your chickens, which is a 1 pound. You got your quarters, 1.25 pound. You got your halves, 1.5 to 2.25, and your jumbos, which are about 2.5 pounds or larger. Keep in mind the yield from lobster. If you get a 1 pound lobster, you're going to get about 4 ounces of meat out of that lobster. So you got 1 pound, 16 ounces of lobster, whole live lobster. Once you cook it off, you take all the meat out, you only get about 4 ounces. Okay, that's one of the reasons why it's so expensive, to get only a yield of 4 ounces out of that lobster. With the lobsters, when you go to harvest lobsters, you always want to harvest the male lobsters. Uh, Usually, if you're purchasing lobsters, the people farming the lobsters, people pulling the lobsters out of the ocean, generally know that they can only get the males. It's one of the requirements for fishing lobsters. Difference between the male and the female. If you look at the male lobster, underneath, you turn it upside down, look underneath, the tail is nice and long and narrow. Okay. If you look at the female, you turn it over, the tail is a little bit wider. It has a little bit more fiber, a little bit more feathery things in there to keep the eggs. That's where when they lay the eggs, they lay them in the tail part of it. They keep them in the tail part of the female. That's why they're a little bit wider. Page 617 talks about breaking down the lobster, different ways to break down your lobster. Like I said, when you want to cook it, if you go to throw it in a pot of boiling water or steam it off, a lot of times I like to get lobster, split it, kill it, and throw it on the grill, grilled off that way. I think it's very flavorful, cooking it that way. 618, get into the breakdown, the composition of the lobster. You got your stomach, you got your coral, you got your tamale, you got your internal veins. On page 618, get into rock lobsters. Rock lobsters are warm water lobsters. Lobsters, generally speaking, you see them with the claws. Okay, those are cold water lobster. Warm water lobster or rock lobster, they don't have claws. So if someone gives you a lobster and it doesn't have claws, it's warm water. If it has claws on there, one's a pincher and one's a crusher, those are cold water lobster. Okay, so if you go down to the Caribbean or down to Florida and you get some fresh lobster, normally it'll be warm water and it doesn't have any claws on it. If you want to go harvesting lobsters down in Florida or the Caribbean, certain times of the year, the lobsters migrate. What they do is they walk in a straight line so many feet away from the coast. And if you want to go harvest some lobster, you just snorkel on a mask on, swim down, and you'll literally see these lobsters walking across the ocean floor in a straight line to wherever they're going. Go down there, pick them up, take them out of the water, and you get your lobster. But keep in mind the difference between warm water and cold water, not only because they're in cold water, warm water, but the lobster itself. Cold water has claws, warm water does not have claws. Page 619, get into shrimp. Prawn is generally used for different types of shrimp or larger shrimp. So if you get very large shrimp, a lot of times people call them prawns. Okay. Market forms, you get the green shrimp. Basically, that's shrimp in the shell. Normally, if you're going to purchase shrimp, it's going to be in the shell. If you go to the coast of North Carolina, and usually towards the end of August or so, they have huge shrimp festivals going on the coast of North Carolina. If you go to those, you'll get some fresh shrimp coming in, and a lot of times those fresh shrimp will have the heads and tails and the whole bit on there. But generally speaking, when you go to purchase your lobster, they'll just have the shell on it. The head is removed from it. 620, they show you how to clean shrimp. Once you get to Garmager and Chef Ray's class, he's going to show you how to clean shrimp. Crabs, page 620, we get into crabs. Alaskan king crabs, those are really big legs, really thick legs. They're found off the coast of Alaska, very deep waters, and they can get very large, very large. Some weigh 6 to 20 pounds. Okay, imagine finding a 20-pound lobster or a 20-pound crab. It's quite large. You got your snow crab. Snow crab is what you usually see in buffets around here. Snow crabs, you'll see them very common around the stores around here. Snow crab is a little bit more skinnier crab leg. You got your Dungeness crab. You got your blue crab. Blue crab is in season in North Carolina, spring and summer. This time for North Carolina, usually you can get blue crabs, nice fresh blue crabs, right up until about July in North Carolina. In fact, this year I ended up going to Fisherman's Catch and get some fresh blue crabs back in June. Got a dozen of those and some shrimp. Made a nice little boil out of it. You know, had threw a pot with some sausage, potatoes, and corn in there. Brought it to a boil. Threw the crab in there. Threw the shrimp in there. Cooked it off with a little Old Bay seasoning. Drained it. Threw it on the table. You just sit down and crack open the crabs and just start eating. Very good. Very delicious crabs. Blue crabs. A lot of work eating them, but the meat that's inside is very, very delicious. Soft shell crabs, basically blue crabs that are molting. Molting means that they're going to lose their shell. So when the crabs grow, they're going to molt. They're going to take their hard shell, will fall off, and then they're going to have a soft shell on there. If you harvest those crabs with the soft shell, you can eat the shell and everything. So you get the soft shell, you clean them, you take the lungs out, the guts out, take them all out, dredge it usually in some seasoned flour, saute it off or deep fry it, and you can eat the shell with the crab and everything on the soft shell. Stone crab, usually you can find those off the coast of Florida. Stone crabs, when they harvest stone crabs, they pull the crab out of the water, take one crab claws off. I can't recall if it's the left or right one, but you take one of the claws off, throw the crab back in the water, and the crab will grow another claw. Well, the stone crabs, the stone claw, basically the shell is just what it implies. That shell is as hard as a stone. So when you want to open those up and get that meat out of there, usually a hammer is needed to crack that shell open. They're very hard, but the meat inside is very good. It's very sweet. So you got your stone crabs. Page 621 shows an example of how to clean the crab. Page 622, you got your blue crabs, Dungeness crabs, king crabs, and snow crabs. Some pictures of those in there. Throughout this chapter, they have tons of pictures of different seafood. I would highly suggest looking over those pictures and getting very familiar with what some of the seafood looks like and what it's called, because you don't know, it might show up on the test. Okay? So study these pictures, study what they are, say what type of seafood it is, either shellfish or fresh fish, flatfish, roundfish. It might show up on the test. So, page 623, we get into miscellaneous seafoods, frog legs. Frog legs, of course, when you catch frogs, you don't really catch them, but you farm raise them nowadays. Just the legs are used off those, the hind legs are used off of that. And yes, once you cook off frog legs, yes, it does taste like chicken, okay? We sell them all the times in our buffets, just lightly seasoned with flour, throw them in deep fryer, fry them off, put them out on the buffet, and people would have at it. And it's just like eating fried chicken. They're very good, very good. You also have shirimi. Shirimi is that imitation crab. If you look at go to store, go to sushi bar or something like that, you'll see sushi rolls with the imitation crab on there. Basically what that is a bunch of white meat pressed together, a little flavoring, a little coloring to make it look like crab, but it's really white fish, okay? So if someone tries to sell you the sashimi and says it's very good crab meat, it's not really crab meat. It's just white fish pressed to look like crab. So be real careful of that. And that is it for chapter 20, seafood. Like I said, you'll have a test on this. You'll have a written test on the seafood chapter. Make sure you read the chapter, make sure you look over those pictures, get familiar with some of the seafood, and you'll have a written test on that. Save your test because that's your study guide for your final written test. Thank you very much.